This is The Critical Thinker, episode 18. Greetings, everyone. This is The Critical Thinker podcast, the podcast dedicated to exploring what it means to be an independent critical thinker. This episode is airing close to the holiday season in December 2011, so happy holidays to all my listeners. I appreciate you tuning in. Alright, in this episode, we're continuing our series on critical thinking about conspiracies. This is part 3. If you haven't listened to or watched the first 2 parts, I would recommend doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll soon see links on the screen that will take you to episode 16 or 17. There are lots of juicy topics in this episode. We're going to talk about mind control methods, we're going to talk about covert CIA operations, and we're going to talk about the philosopher Karl Popper and the principle of falsifiability. It's another long one, so get comfortable. Let's recap first. In episode 16, I gave an introduction to conspiracies and conspiracy theories. We talked about why these are interesting from a critical thinking perspective. In episode 17, we talked about arguments for a view that I called default skepticism, which states that the grander a conspiracy theory is, the less likely it is that it's true. This is a very popular view among professional skeptics. People like Michael Shermer, the author of books like The Believing Brain and Why Do People Believe Weird Things? The editors of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, secular humanist think tanks like the Center for Inquiry, and others. It's also, I think, the most common view one encounters among mainstream academics generally. Now, I want to clarify that what I'm calling default skepticism isn't a claim about the strength or weakness of the evidence for any particular conspiracy hypothesis. It's a more general claim about what happens to the plausibility of conspiracy hypotheses as they scale, as they include more people and more institutions over longer time periods. And because of this, the arguments for default skepticism are also very general. They're not tied to the specifics of any particular conspiracy, even though it might seem so at first glance when you hear people respond in this way. Here's an example of the kind of reasoning I have in mind. I was just browsing the summer issue of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, which was the follow-up to the previous issue that focused on debunking 9/11 conspiracy theories that assert that the World Trade Center came down as a result of a controlled demolition. In the letters section of this issue, a reader writes the following, and I quote, "I found it easy to dismiss the demolition theories without requiring analytical refutation. These theories introduce far greater problems to address than anything they purport to solve. It seems the mastermind would almost certainly have had to be the President of the United States. What would we do to such a president if he were found out? Clearly, he would have to believe that absolute secrecy could be maintained forever. We can't even keep secrets in the CIA. Many people would have to be involved over an extended time period, demolition experts, hijackers, FBI and Interpol agents, etc. What if one of the WTC aircraft hijackings had been thwarted by the passengers, as in the case of Flight 93? One of the towers would still be standing, with demolition's evidence that would have to be removed. Even a flight cancellation or delay would have created havoc. What if WTC-7 hadn't caught fire? Certainly this couldn't have been guaranteed. Would they have proceeded with the demolition? What if the demolition triggers failed due to damage from the aircraft? The list could go on for pages. All of this so we could go to war in Afghanistan? Give me a break." Close quote. So the premise that underwrites this line of reasoning is a very general one. It's not specific to 9/11 theories. The idea is this: for it to be rational to try and implement a grand conspiracy of this sort, you would need enormous confidence that a complex series of operations would go off without a hitch, that information about the conspiracy could be contained indefinitely, and that the behavior of dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of people can be controlled with a high degree of certainty. So the objection is that, given what we know about human nature and the functioning of complex social institutions, and the difficulty of predicting the success of complex operations like the ones we're talking about here, we just don't have any reason to think this level of control and certainty is possible. As the conspiracy scales in size and complexity, the more likely it is to fail, and less likely that rational people would even attempt it. A corollary of this objection is that conspiracy theorists seem to be committed to the belief that the conspirators possess extraordinary, almost superhuman powers of prediction, persuasion, and control. But why should we believe that such powers exist? Now, as I said at the end of last episode, the most common response of conspiracy theorists to this line of reasoning is, surprisingly, not to reject it, but to accept how the issue is framed. But their response, contrary to the skeptic, is to insist that the methods of information regulation and psychological control that are required for grand conspiracies to be successful do, in fact, exist. It is precisely these methods of mind control, coupled with carefully organized campaigns of disinformation and distraction, that are the means by which grand conspiracies are successfully implemented and maintained. So this is where we left off last episode. In this episode, I want to explore how the dialectic between the two sides typically unfolds from this point forward. And I'll use the discussion to introduce an influential concept in scientific reasoning, the concept of falsifiability. Skeptics will often say that grand conspiracy theories are unfalsifiable, and I'll try to explain what they mean by this, and how conspiracy theorists typically respond to this charge. Alright, we're talking now about the existence of mind control methods of psychological control and persuasion that are used to ensure that a conspiracy is implemented and maintained with a high probability of success, even with many people involved. Skeptics are generally, skeptical that such methods exist. Conspiracy theorists are generally confident that they do. Now, we might optimistically hope that we could settle the issue by carefully investigating these mind control methods and testing whether they can really do what conspiracy theorists say they can do. But, not surprisingly, it's not that easy. Everybody grants that there exists a wide range of techniques of psychological manipulation that are used by governments and businesses to influence our beliefs and decisions. I've talked about some of these in previous episodes. But conspiracy theorists will say that the existence of the most effective and powerful mind control techniques, the ones that the elites actually rely on to successfully implement their agenda, is itself a well-regulated secret. They'll say that these are either very old methods that the elites have always deployed, or relatively new methods that have been developed in secret government programs and intentionally kept out of the scientific mainstream, or some combination of these two. Now, it's hard to generalize about mind control methods, because there's a lot of variation among conspiracy theorists about which methods are used. Some are more plausible to the skeptic than others. For example, conspiracy theorists will talk a great deal about the use of mass media as a propaganda tool for manipulating public opinion and behavior. And they'll cite the anti-democratic propaganda theories of prominent mid-century intellectuals like Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays and Harold Lasswell, who thought that modern government required the manipulation of mass opinion by propaganda methods engineered by an elite ruling class. The main idea here is certainly not a fringe idea. There's also a long tradition of academic writing on the left, for example, from writers influenced by Freud and Marx and Hegel, that is deeply critical of the control of media in the service of government and corporate propaganda. I'm thinking here of names like Theodore Adorno and Herbert Marcuse and Jacques Ellul and Noam Chomsky, who've all written extensively on the threat to democracy and human freedom posed by propaganda through the mass media. Conspiracy theorists also write about the deliberate dumbing down of our education system as a means of public manipulation. But there are radical education critics who have argued for similar conclusions. So again, it's not just grand conspiracy theorists who are making these arguments. Conspiracy theorists are also concerned about the increasing capacity of technology to track our internet activity and shopping behavior and online conversations, and they worry about threats to privacy and personal security that these technologies pose. But so are many technology watchdog groups. There's nothing unusual or fringe about this worry either. On the other hand, many conspiracy theorists also think that the government and corporations are adding toxins to our food and water supply with the express aim of altering our brain chemistry to make us more docile and apathetic and more susceptible to manipulation. And if you're diligent and eat only organic local foods and purified water, they'll still get you by spraying chemicals from airplanes in the atmosphere that do the same thing. Others believe that the electromagnetic radiation that we're constantly bathed in can be manipulated to alter brain states, and that the proliferation of cell phones and cell phone towers is a vehicle for exposing us to this mind-altering radiation. Switching gears again, There are many conspiracy theorists who think that the elite control of human civilization actually goes back to ancient times, that they employ methods of persuasion that have correspondingly ancient origins, with roots in pagan mystery cults and occult symbolism that, they claim, one can find hiding in plain sight everywhere up to the present day. Some believe that the presence of these archetypal symbols in our media environment has an effect on our collective unconscious, to use the Jungian term, and they're intentionally inserted as a tool of mass psychological conditioning. These sorts of ideas are much harder for skeptics to swallow. And not all conspiracy theorists defend them all, so as I said, it's hard to generalize about what mind control methods conspiracy theorists are committed to. What we can say is that there is a spectrum of views that, from the skeptic standpoint, range from more plausible to less plausible. This is all I'm going to say about these sorts of mind control methods. This isn't intended to be an exhaustive list, of course. We could be talking all day about nanorobots and assorted other mind control speculations. I'll leave some links in the show notes where you can follow up on some of this material. What I want to focus on here, what interests me about the debate over mind control methods, is how raising this issue changes the nature of the dialectic between the conspiracy theorist and the skeptic. As I said earlier, one might hope that we could settle the issue by carefully investigating these mind control methods, confirming that they exist, and testing whether they can really do what conspiracy theorists say they can do. But the problem is that, according to conspiracy theorists, information about the existence and use of these methods is itself carefully regulated by the elites, using the very methods that are under discussion. Some of it is publicly available, but much of it is shrouded in secrecy, as one might expect. And now this is where the debate usually stalls. We might forgive the skeptic for thinking that there's a threat of circularity looming in this line of response. The skeptic is asking about the plausibility of grand conspiracies. They identify a core assumption about the controllability of information or human behavior that underwrites such theories, and the skeptic asks for evidence for this core assumption. But they're told that she won't find such evidence, at least not in the mainstream science journals or the halls of mainstream academia, or in the mainstream news media, because concealing the existence of the methods in question is itself central to the grand conspiracy, and the elites have control over the content of these mainstream information sources. Now, what can be even more frustrating for the skeptic is the belief that you often encounter among conspiracy theorists that mainstream media and science and academia have been infiltrated by so-called disinformers. People who at some level are aware of the truth about the elite agenda and the existence of these mind control methods, or who are being unwittingly manipulated by the elites, and who are helping to implement the elite agenda by sowing disinformation within their respective academic field and within the public mainstream. So if you present evidence against the existence of these mind control methods, you may find yourself accused of being one of them. Disinformer intentionally spreading lies to help maintain the conspiracy, or at best a dupe, a tool of the powers that be, whether you're aware of it or not. Not surprisingly, at this point it's hard to see how productive dialogue between the skeptic and the conspiracy theorist can continue. A common skeptical response is to accuse the conspiracy theorist of indulging in unfalsifiable paranoid fantasies that are immune to rational criticism. Why immune to rational criticism? Because every bit of evidence that would count against the theory is either dismissed or reinterpreted as disinformation manufactured by the conspirators. This quality, that any bit of countervailing evidence can in principle be accommodated within a grand conspiracy theory, has been called self-sealing by some. Whenever the theory is poked by some bit of countervailing evidence, it seals itself by reinterpreting that evidence as consistent with the theory after all. Philosophers of science might describe this as a case of unfalsifiability, in Karl Popper's sense of the word. It's not a compliment to call a theory unfalsifiable. Karl Popper was an Austrian philosopher of science, arguably one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. He introduced the concept of unfalsifiability to identify theories that, in his judgment, didn't really qualify as scientific theories at all, because they could never be open to a genuine empirical test. In a genuine test, you lay out the conditions under which an observation or an experimental result would count against the theory, would give us a reason to reject the theory. Genuine tests, for Popper, are always potential falsifications of a theory. The theory sticks its neck out and risks being chopped off by experimental or observational results. For Popper, the best theories are the ones that stick their neck out the farthest, the ones that are the most daring and specific in their predictions, and survive these tests. To give a simple example, if your horoscope says that today, quote, new opportunities will present themselves but may come with costs that you will have to consider carefully, unquote, that's a virtually unfalsifiable prediction. It's hard to imagine what sort of day you would have that would count as falsifying this prediction. Popper would say that it's not an empirical claim at all. It's not something that you can assign a truth value to that could be subject to empirical testing. But what if your horoscope said that today, at 3:41 p.m., a man wearing a two-piece suit and dark sunglasses will ring your doorbell and offer you a great deal on a timeshare condo in Florida? Now that is a falsifiable claim. What makes it falsifiable is that it clearly specifies the conditions under which we could all agree that the claim is false. If a man shows up at 2:30 instead of 3:41, it's false. If the man isn't wearing dark sunglasses, it's false. If the man offers a timeshare in Mexico instead of Florida, it's false. We all have a shared understanding of what would count as evidence that would falsify this claim. For Popper, good theories, genuinely scientific theories, make falsifiable claims. Theories that don't make falsifiable claims are not scientific. They're pseudosciences. Theories masquerading as genuine theories, but really aren't really saying anything, or at least not saying anything that evidence could have any bearing on. Now, there are a couple different ways that theories can be unfalsifiable. They can be unfalsifiable because they make only vague predictions, like that first horoscope prediction. That's not the major concern about grand conspiracy theories, though I suppose could be a concern in some cases. But theories can also be made unfalsifiable in another way, by indulging in ad hoc revisions to the theory that are motivated simply to accommodate potentially falsifying evidence. Consider, for example, the claim that the hands on my wristwatch turn because there's a little green demon inside my watch that makes them turn. You naturally ask, okay, let's open the watch and see for ourselves. I open the watch, but we don't see any little green demon. You say, aha, we've falsified your claim. But I say, not so fast. My little green demon has the property that it turns immaterial and invisible when the watch is opened up. So I've revised the green demon hypothesis to make it consistent with the observational results. So the observation no longer counts as falsifying it. But the worry now is that I might try to do this for any attempt to falsify the hypothesis. Just keep revising the hypothesis to accommodate the new evidence, thereby rendering the hypothesis immune to falsification. Now this is much closer to the worry that skeptics have about conspiracy theories when they include claims about pervasive mind control. The worry is that when you question every source of information you hear from mainstream media or mainstream science, or suspect all mainstream information sources of being biased or compromised in a way that makes them untrustworthy, then it's very easy to make a conspiracy theory effectively unfalsifiable. And this gives support to the common complaint that conspiracy theorists are dogmatically attached to an ideological worldview that is immune to rational criticism. Now, before we move on, I just want to add that by invoking Popper here, I'm not endorsing Popper's whole philosophy of science. I'm certainly not. But the concepts of falsifiability and unfalsifiability are important. They belong in our critical thinking lexicon, and they're often useful in helping to make a point, which is all I'm doing here. So, how does the conspiracy theorist typically respond to this charge that their worldview is dogmatically ideological and unfalsifiable? Well, conspiracy theorists will insist that it's just false to think that there's no publicly available evidence for their claims. They'll point to historical precedents that even skeptics have to grant. On the subject of mind control methods, for example, it's now widely known that the CIA was involved in covert illegal mind control experimentation on human subjects that began in the 1950s and continued at least through the late 1960s. If you search for MKUltra on Wikipedia, you'll find an entry under that name. MKUltra was the codename for a project that, and I quote, involved the use of many methodologies to manipulate individual mental states and alter brain functions, including the surreptitious administration of drugs and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, as well as various forms of torture. Unquote. On the U.S. Senate floor in 1977, Senator Ted Kennedy said the following, quote, The deputy director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program, which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. Several of these tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations." Unquote. Now, the existence of programs like this doesn't by itself show that they were successful at developing the sorts of mind control methods that grand conspiracy theorists require. In fact, the official line espoused by the government is that the science was poorly conducted and the results unreliable. But it does establish an interest and a willingness on the part of governments to invest time and money on secret projects of the sort that conspiracy theorists are worried about. Conspiracy theorists also point to other covert government programs that reveal a willingness to engage in the sorts of activities that they believe are actually being implemented on a larger scale. For example, every conspiracy theorist is familiar with COINTELPRO, an FBI program that operated over the same time period, roughly mid-50s to early 70s. COINTELPRO is an acronym for Counterintelligence Program, and its mandate was, as the Wikipedia once again puts it, surveying, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations that the government believed to be subversive, typically communist and socialist organizations, individuals and organizations associated with the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, anti-war movements, and various other radical movements on the political left and the right. Now, what's interesting to conspiracy theorists isn't necessarily the targets of this program, but the methods they used. Government operatives didn't just spy on political activists. They infiltrated organizations. They planted false media stories in the name of the targeted groups. They forged letters, spread misinformation about meetings, set up pseudo-movements run by government agents. They used the legal system to harass people. They made them appear to be criminals. They gave false testimony and used fabricated evidence to arrest and imprison people. They conspired with local police departments to threaten people, conduct illegal raids and searches, commit assaults, vandalism, and instigate police actions that resulted in civilian deaths. Now, the official line, once again, is that COINTELPRO was shut down after their operations became public in the early 1970s. But this hasn't kept people from speculating on the existence of continuing programs of government surveillance and infiltration. For conspiracy theorists, what COINTELPRO and other programs like it demonstrate is at least the plausibility of an ongoing program of secret government activities that is by every measure illegal and immoral, yet authorized at the highest levels of government. They will remind us that COINTELPRO continued its operations and reported to the highest officials under 4 different White House administrations. Is it so implausible that such operations might not be continuing, or other operations like it or related to it, with the exponentially more powerful technological resources that are available today? So this is one common pattern of response from conspiracy theorists to the charge that their views are implausible. They're only implausible, they'll say, to those who are ignorant of history and ignorant of the wide and varied sources of information that are out there in the public square, that point to activities and programs being conducted in secret, with aims that we should at least be highly suspicious of. And they'll throw back the charge of unfalsifiable dogmatism to the skeptics. They'll say that skeptics are in the grip of their own presuppositions and confirmation bias and tunnel vision, where any evidence that challenges the official or mainstream version of events is assumed to be false and unreliable from the outset, giving no room for this evidence to receive a fair hearing. So how does the skeptic respond at this point? Well, I think they'll grant that the history of programs like MKUltra and COINTELPRO is sobering. We should all know it. But the skeptic is going to point out that, by their very nature, grand conspiracy theories make claims that go beyond what can be established by publicly available evidence. It's one thing to say that MKUltra investigated mind control techniques. It's another thing to say that the government has actually succeeded in developing techniques that can do the job that conspiracy theorists require them to, and that they're currently in operation right now. It's one thing to say that the government uses the media as a propaganda tool. It's quite another thing to say that all forms of mainstream information are under the control of a cabal of elites that are using them to implement the agenda of a totalitarian world government. At best, the skeptic will grant that the sordid history of secret government activities and covert scientific programs helps to establish the possibility of the sort of top-down control that's required. But possibility is a very weak epistemic notion. Lots of things are possible, but still highly unlikely. It's logically possible that governments have been conspiring with aliens for decades. It's logically possible that the government is using cell phones to transmit mind-controlling signals into our brains. It's logically possible that we're all living in the Matrix. But mere logical possibility doesn't give us positive reasons to think any of this is true. So the ball falls back into the conspiracy theorist's court. The skeptic is asking for evidence for their more substantive claims about covert activities, evidence that will withstand scrutiny in the public square. And they're asking that conspiracy theorists not respond to challenges by continual ad hoc revision of their theory, or accusing the challenger of being a disinformer or a stooge of the elites. Now, not that anyone's asking me, but if I might offer some advice to those sympathetic to grand conspiracy theories, it's that you should consider taking this request seriously. Because if you don't, there's virtually no chance that your views will be taken seriously by a broader mainstream public. Now maybe that's not your goal. Maybe you think that the mainstream is compromised beyond hope, and you're resigned to fighting a guerrilla war from the jungle and picking up defectors as they come. All I'm saying is that there are people who will listen to you if you engage them on terms that don't presuppose the truth of your worldview and the falsity of theirs right out of the gate. And if I might offer some advice to skeptics, it's twofold. 1. Resist the urge to label all conspiracy theorists as irrational and paranoid, at least if your goal is to have some kind of productive dialogue with them. And 2. Consider seriously the possibility that they might know more than you on certain subjects, like, for example, the history of covert government operations. This is necessary, I think, for beginning a dialogue in openness and good faith, rather than prejudging the conclusion at the very outset. Okay, this has been a long episode, so I'll wrap things up here. In the next episode, I'm going to approach the skeptical position from a different angle, by looking at what people have written about cognitive biases and the roles they may play in explaining why conspiracy theories can be so compelling to people. I don't think I'll make any friends among conspiracy theorists with this episode, but it's important that all sides understand how these questions are being talked about. And if nothing else, it's an excuse to introduce a couple of new cognitive biases that are interesting in their own right. If you are interested, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Just search for Critical Thinker in the search bar, and you'll find two versions of the show. One audio only that you can enjoy during a driving commute or on the treadmill at the gym or walking the dog. And the other a video version that includes text and graphics. The video version is also available on YouTube, which you can find if you search for my YouTube channel, Philosophy Freak. It's all one word. And finally, you can visit the website where the podcast episodes are hosted, www.criticalthinkeracademy.com. The advantage of checking out the episode posts on the website is that you get access to the podcast show notes, which include references and links to resources mentioned in the episode or that are relevant to the episode. And if you're on Facebook, just search for Critical Thinker Academy. You can check out our Facebook page and participate in the discussion there. Okay, that's it. Until next time, thanks for listening.